So the study came out, cannabis does not increase suicidal behavior in psychiatric patients. Once again, you can't prove a negative, so the headline is wrong. But their finding, actually, they said, our findings indicate there is no association. You can't find there is no association. All you can say is we didn't find that there is an association. Just like you can't prove that there are no keys in the house. All you can say is you didn't find them. So the study looked and didn't find the association, but again, look at how they looked. So they asked people, did you use marijuana more than once over the past year? So they got people who use twice, 3 times, 4 times. What we know is that most marijuana users use rarely or occasionally. A small percentage use very large amounts. So they really diluted the data, because the other thing we know is all the studies on suicide show that it occurred in the people who use regularly and heavily. If you did a study of everybody who ever had 1 cigarette in their life, you would find no association between smoking cigarettes and lung cancer. But if you focus only on people who are heavy smokers, there's a huge correlation. And that's what they did. I consider this a very misleading study. Also, the study did find, they actually said, oh, by the way, there is a link between frequency of use and suicide attempts. So they did find that marijuana is associated with suicide attempts. And what all the other studies found, people who used it heavily. Okay, same thing is happening with traffic fatalities. Traffic fatalities related to marijuana, stoned drivers testing positive for THC, have tripled between 1999 and 2010, mainly where they loosened the marijuana laws. Now just look at this. So here's Maryland. Maryland decriminalized, which is a loosening of marijuana laws. And the year after they decriminalized marijuana, crashes, not fatal ones, but all crashes involving marijuana increased by 80%. Colorado and Washington both legalized marijuana. And the top thing here is a headline from the Denver Post. Traffic fatalities linked to marijuana are up sharply in Colorado. Is legalization to blame? The Denver Post gets a lot of advertising money from the marijuana industry, so they are never going to say legalization is to blame. They're going to put it as a question. But the fact is, traffic fatalities in Washington, traffic fatalities involving marijuana, the active metabolite of THC, doubled in Washington the year after legalization. In Colorado, it took 3 years, but they tripled. So clearly, marijuana, loosening marijuana laws is linked to traffic fatalities. And the thing is, what's happening now, it used to be that traffic fatalities were going up, but it was still, alcohol was the 800-pound gorilla. 10 to 1, the traffic fatalities involved alcohol as opposed to marijuana. In this most recent study, alcohol, 187 fatalities in Colorado, marijuana, 99. It's only 2 to 1. So marijuana is gaining, and it's really possible that marijuana could become the deadliest drug behind the wheel. I think we'll see it eventually become the deadliest drug. Yes?
One thing that's always disturbing with these statistics is this. Do we have an estimate of how many people are driving under the influence or of either one? Because it might be that given the number of people that are driving with alcohol, that it's a lot less dangerous than marijuana, or it could be the reverse.
Right.
And so without that estimate of how many people are actually driving under the influence of each, we don't really know how to interpret part of this.
Right. He's asking, how do you know what this doesn't? I mean, this still tells you, it tells you a fair amount, but it doesn't tell you exactly how serious each drug is. Is marijuana worse behind the wheel, or is alcohol worse behind the wheel? And we don't know, because we don't know how many are driving drunk or driving stoned. But we do know the end result. Okay, and yet, this is other research. Half of all marijuana users believe it's safe to drive while high. 2/3 of teenage marijuana users believe that it's safe to drive while high. And 1/3 of them believe that they drive better while high. And this is important because a lot of people are driving high. In Michigan, 51% of medical marijuana patients admitted to driving while high. There's a lot. The thing is, marijuana denial is just kind of amazing. I mean, most alcoholics know that drunk driving is not a good thing. Whereas marijuana users seem to say, no, it doesn't affect me. I'm fine. I can drive. It doesn't affect me. And marijuana denial is a bit different. So there's more of a tendency for them to drive while high. there's so many studies on marijuana and driving that you can pick one to prove almost anything. So the best thing is a good meta-analysis, and probably the best one was done. They looked at a lot of studies. They only looked at marijuana. They didn't want to look at anybody where alcohol or other drugs were involved. And some studies showed no increased risk. One study showed an 8-fold risk, but they averaged it together and found driving while stoned doubles the odds of a serious or fatal accident. And here's a particularly good study from Colorado. They did very good controls. There's years.
I have a question. So, like, marijuana stays in your system for quite longer than alcohol.
Right.
So, what are the like THC levels at the point of the accident?
Well, the question is, yeah, marijuana stays in the system, but there's an active metabolite of marijuana that goes pretty quickly, and that's what they have to look for. So in Washington, they published the data for all the different metabolites, and for most of the metabolites, there was no change in the fatal accidents before and after legalization. But for the most active one, that's the one that it doubled for, and that's what they have to look at. Yeah, they have to test for that.
Have there been any overdose deaths associated with marijuana?
They say that there are, but there's hardly the overdose question. Pretty much the overdose question is brought up. It's a marijuana industry talking point. They like to say there's no deaths by overdose. Tobacco, there's pretty much no deaths by overdose. Alcohol, rarely overdose. People do die from it, but not very often. Tobacco kills almost everybody with lung cancer and heart disease and stroke. So the question about overdose deaths is, and I watch for it because if researchers say that, I go, they're using a marijuana industry talking point. And the pot lobby used to say nobody ever died from overdose. Then we introduced the traffic fatality stuff, and they changed it. They used to say nobody ever died from marijuana. Marijuana had never killed anyone. And then they found out, okay, it kills people behind the wheel. So they changed it. Marijuana never killed anyone by overdose. But anyway, as far as I've heard some reports of it, I don't know that it actually has.
So we know that the metabolites stay in the system for about 30 days. How long does the active metabolite stay in?
Well, I'm going to come to a study on that because that's a real question. Let me just look at this one. So Colorado allowed dispensaries in 2009. Use went from 5,000 medical marijuana patients to 125,000. And these guys did a good control. They looked at traffic fatalities just over those 2 years. So alcohol-related fatalities in Colorado stayed flat during those 2 years. Marijuana-related fatalities in the non-medical marijuana states stayed flat during those 2 years. Marijuana-related fatalities in Colorado doubled during those 2 years. So good controls, good comparison. I want to mention some more deceptive research because it's a real problem. This is the same people, Reese and Anderson. So they did a study and they found that traffic fatalities fall by nearly 9% after the legalization of medical marijuana. And they claim it's because marijuana replaces alcohol. And here's Reuters publishing their study and saying the same thing. After states legalized medical marijuana, traffic deaths fell. What they don't tell you is in states that didn't have medical marijuana, traffic fatalities also fell. And what they did here is there's just no control. Traffic fatalities have been falling since the 1960s, especially since the 80s with Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. Falling just as much. Here's Tennessee, here's Colorado, falling equally in medical marijuana and non-medical marijuana states. So what they've done is, they found a trend and they've claimed that it's caused by, they claim that marijuana plays a role in it when it plays no role at all. And it gets disseminated by the news, which is the purpose of these studies. What's happening recently is it's not just marijuana-involved fatalities are increasing. Now they're finding car crashes in general are increasing. So in the 4 states that legalized pot, this is from the Insurance Journal, Nevada, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, they found an increase in the number of car accidents. And that's unusual because it's been pretty steadily going down since the 1960s and probably has to do with marijuana. What it would mean is that the marijuana-related accidents are increasing faster than the alcohol ones are decreasing. Anyway, what works to prevent stoned driving? Same thing that prevents drunk driving. Education doesn't work very well, especially for pot smokers, because they all think they're fine. The effect is minimal. They know how to drive. They can compensate. The threat of punishment works for drunk drivers too. That's roadside testing really would decrease stoned driving. The other problem is marijuana use at work. Employers are concerned about people operating machines, work performance, attendance. And we know in Washington, Oregon, Colorado, 1 in 4 marijuana users actually report you getting high before or during work. This is my favorite study. 1985, they did this research with airline pilots, and they had them smoke 1 joint, and they tested them before on a flight simulator. They didn't use real 747s. They used a flight simulator. It looks like it. But anyway, they tested them before they smoked pot. They tested them 24 hours later, not the next morning, 24 hours later. And what they found is they had more difficulty aligning with and landing on the runway. The lateral deviation was twice the pre-marijuana test. 1 pilot missed the runway entirely. And when they asked them, the pilots all said they were fine. They were not affected at all. They were not aware of any impairment. And this applies to everything. It applies to employees. It applies to driving. I would tell you it applies to me. When I was in college, I was really good. I studied at night and then smoked pot afterwards. What I didn't realize is that it's a long-acting drug, and it interfered with my ability to learn. I had no idea. Now I realize that it did. I would have had a much better college career had it not been for marijuana. So this finding really applies very widely to a lot of people. I mean, everybody. And it's that marijuana denial. It didn't affect me. It doesn't affect me. Workplace problems. This is a study published in JAMA. It was done at the post office. It was people who tested positive on a pre-employment screen for marijuana. They still got hired. It's not that they're using marijuana at work. All they know is they use it outside of work. Compared to non-users, more accidents, more discipline, more turnover, more sick days, more injuries. This is a cute study. Anybody who has ever used marijuana can completely identify with this study. THC makes rats lazy and less willing to try a cognitively demanding test. And what they did is they trained rats to get lumps of sugar. And they could do it 2 ways. One was really easy. There was a bar that was always there that they could press and get 1 little lump. And then there's a very complicated task where there's only a brief period of time. They had to press it right then, but they'd get a whole bunch of sugar. And then they divided rats into 3 groups, gave 1 CBD, 1 placebo, and 1 THC. And the ones that got CBD and placebo, they kept doing the really complicated task. The ones that got THC did the really easy task. This study, similar study done in humans, it was done in college students, and they found that marijuana users had less initiative and less persistence. But on the whole issue of marijuana in the workplace, there was also deceptive research. I found this one. It's called The Effects of Medical Marijuana on Sickness Absence. And he studied and he found that absenteeism decreased in medical marijuana states. And so he concluded that medical marijuana laws will save employers money. Well, the study was done when absenteeism was decreasing all across the country. This is a graph of absenteeism. From 2006 to 2014, it dropped almost in half. I don't know exactly why, but it dropped just as much in non-medical marijuana states as medical marijuana states. Again, a study with absolutely no controls. He found a trend and pretended that marijuana caused it.